operation, that's a really big clause. It's got the most requirements in the standard. So we'll break this up into more than one video. But to share my screen here, what you're going to see in this section is that we've gone through let's look at this slide 4, 5, 6, and 7. So now we're in this do lane where you really are customer focused. This is your value stream. This is a piece of really kind of game day or your main manufacturing workflow, or whatever you're getting paid by the customer for. This is really the value stream for that particular piece of the company. Okay, you can see that if you get into the details of operations, you've got 8.1, which is operational planning and control requirements for the product and service. That's 8.2. 8.3, design and development of products and services. 8.3, control of externally provided processes, products, and services, also known as purchasing in past lives. And 8.5, this is production and service provision. And 6, release of products and services. And 8.7, control of non-conforming process outputs. Okay, let's jump right in. Back over here to the standard. So operational planning and control. The organization shall plan, implement, and control the processes that we're seeing in 4.4. The requirements of the provisions of products and services, and to implement the actions determined in clause 6 by determining the requirements of the service or products that you provide, establishing criteria for the processes and acceptance of products and services. So what is the acceptance criteria? Determining the resources needed to achieve conformity of those products and service requirements, implementing controls of processes in accordance with that criteria, determining and maintaining and retaining, so having document information both on the normal documentation side and record retention side, to the extent necessary to ensure that you have confidence that the process has been carried out as planned, and to demonstrate conformity of products and services to their requirements. The output of planning shall be suitable for the organization's operations, meaning if I'm going to create instructions or a checklist for operational processes like production, or if I'm creating a checklist for a valet at a hotel, it needs to be in a suitable language, needs to be understood, needs to be accessible, etc., for those folks that need the output of that planning, which again would be instructions or checklists or whatever. The organization shall control plan changes and review the consequences of unintended changes, taking action to mitigate any adverse effects as necessary. And the organization shall ensure that any outsourced processes that you use are controlled. 8.2, this is where you're really gathering requirements. So communication with your customer shall include providing information related to products and services. How are they going to use these products? How are they going to use these services? Handling of any inquiries, contracts, or orders, including any changes. Obtaining customer feedback related to products and services, including complaints. Handling and controlling customer property, and establishing specific requirements for any contingency actions when relevant. Determining the requirements. This is general rules for engagement and communication with the customer, and this is specific for communication with regard to specific requirements of the products and the services. So when determining the requirements of products and services to be offered to the customer, organization shall ensure that the requirements are defined, including any statutory and regulatory requirements, and anything that's considered necessary by the organization internally. Like, what is the client going to be using this bucket for, or using this shovel for, or using this service for? So knowing that is important early on in your engagement with the customer. In the organization, you need to make sure that you can actually meet the claims. So this is a new strand of nomenclature here. Meet the claims for the product and the services that are being offered. Okay, so general customer communication specific to requirements of the products or services you're selling to the customer. And then how this one, 823, is how you go about reviewing the products and the services. So 8231, the organization shall ensure that it has the ability to meet the requirements for products and services that it offers to the customer. The organization shall conduct a review before committing to supply products and services to an organization. This one is something I see all the time not being done properly. You know, the culture is take whatever order we can get, tell the customer yes, tell the customer yes. You know, going to, let's say, a rental car company and you want to rent a car. Oh yeah, come on down. We'll you know, make a reservation. We got plenty of cars for you. And then you show up and there are no cars. There's actually a Seinfeld episode that's completely dedicated to this. So before committing to the supply of products or services, you need to do a review, and that review needs to include requirements that are specified by the customer, including requirements for delivery and post-delivery activities, requirements not stated by the customer, but necessary for the specific or intended use when known. So back to the rental car thing, the rental car company needs to know, hey, is this going to be a round trip rental or is it a one-way drop? These are things that you need to flush out in your relationship with the customer to understand the customer requirements either for the products and services. What about requirements specified by the organization internally? You know, in your engagement with the customer, what are internal requirements that need to be applied to them? Getting things in writing might be one. Any statutory and regulatory requirements that are applicable to the products and services, contract or order requirements that differ from those previously expressed. So you might say something like, all right, you placed an order for 10,000 widgets, but we don't have the capacity. Is it okay to give you 2,500 parts this week, 2,500 for the next 3 weeks after that? Okay. The organization shall ensure that contract or order requirements differing from those previously defined are resolved. The customer requirements shall be confirmed by the organization before acceptance when the customer does not provide a documented state of their requirements. Okay. The organization shall retain documented information as a record on the results of the review and any new requirements from the products and services. Okay, so let's say you've locked in, you have a contract, you're good to go. You've got a record of that mutual agreement between you and the customer for the order. Now we're dealing with changes. So the organization shall ensure that any relevant document information is amended and that relevant persons are made aware of changes of the change requirements when the requirements for the products and services are changed. Okay, so that's really a change. Sometimes you'll see like a change request or change authorization notice or something like that. That's a part of that that piece of requirements, gathering requirements as it relates to the customer. And 8.3, this one's pretty big, so hang on tight here. We're going to try to get through it, and then I'll break this clause 8 into at least 2 videos. So 831, the organization, this is again the design and development of products and services. So the organization shall establish, implement, and maintain a design development process that's appropriate to ensure the subsequent provisions of products and services. So 832 is planning. So you have to determine at specific stages. So in determining the stages and controls for design and development, you should also consider nature, duration, and complexity of design and development activities. You know, how long does it take to perform these design and development activities for a pilot program or a beta test or something like that? The required process stages, including applicable design and development review, required design and development verification and validation, responsibilities and authority, internal and external resources that are needed, the need to control interfaces between people that are involved in the process, the need for involving the customer and users. The customer might not be the actual end user, so you might want to do some user testing, all that. So it's really coming up with like a checklist or a program plan here that also involves requirements of subsequent provisions of products and services, the level of control expected from the design development process by the customer and any other relevant interested party, and then documented information need to demonstrate that these requirements have been met. So that's really the overarching planning. And this is almost a miniature or more finite version of 8.1, is operational planning. So think about, clause 4 is like QMS planning, clause 8 is operational planning, clause 8.2.3 is the design and development planning. How does that smaller committee or design development team work overall? Inputs. So the organization shall determine the requirements essential for specific types of products and services to be designed and developed. The organization shall consider functional performance requirements, information derived from previous design or development activities, so previous versions or benchmarks, even outside of your organization, any statutory regulatory requirements, standards or codes of practice that you've committed to implement, and potential consequences of failure due to the nature of the products and services. Inputs shall be adequate for design development purposes, complete and unambiguous. So things like, we're designing a new widget, but what are you using the widget for? And conflicting design and development inputs shall be resolved. You may want some attribute of something that's a new design, but it won't fit within the compartment of, let's say, under the hood of a vehicle or something like that. So there needs to be resolution if there are any gaps there. And then the organization shall retain documented information on design development inputs. Controls within design and development. So this used to be the clause for design verification and design validation. They've all been kind of clumped in, those two, into this section. So you have to apply control to ensure that the results are achieved as defined. Reviews are conducted to evaluate the ability of the design and development criteria to meet results or meet the requirements. Verification activities are conducted, validation activities are conducted. Any necessary actions are taken on problems determined during the review or verification or validation activities. So if you find a gap during verification or validation, you take action on that, and then you have documented information in forms of a record that's retained. So design development output. So the organization shall ensure that these outputs meet the input requirements, are adequate for subsequent processes, like for manufacturability or like for other operational processes, include or reference monitoring and measurement requirements as appropriate, and acceptance criteria, and specify characteristics of the products and services that are essential for their intended purpose. So used the way they're intended, and are safe and proper, and their safe and proper provision. Okay. See this in a lot of cases with assembly. You're assembling something that you've purchased at the store or whatever. What's the safe way to put this thing together? Furniture that might fall over, it needs to be anchored to the wall, so on and so forth. So that would be considered an output. The organization shall retain documented information on design development outputs. So what about changes? So you have to identify, the organization shall identify, review, and control changes made during or subsequent to the design development of products and services to the extent necessary to ensure that there's no adverse impact on conformity of the requirements. The organization shall retain a record of changes, the results of reviews, who authorized the change, the actions taken to prevent adverse impact. So you'll start to see the word authorization, just like you saw some people, people and human factors being sprinkled in, you're going to start to see authorized, persons authorized, and that sort of thing in the rest, throughout the rest of the standard. So let's get through 8.4 real quick, which is really the purchasing piece or supplier piece. 8.1 or 8.4.1, the organization shall ensure that externally provided processes, products, and services conform to requirements. So you have to control products and processes and products and services of those external providers when products and services from external providers are intended for incorporation into the organization's own products and services, when products and services are provided directly to the customer or customers by external providers on behalf of the organization, let's say like a distributor or installer or something like that. When there's a process or part of a process that's provided by an external result of a decision made by the organization. So maybe a finisher, maybe a plating or hardening process or something like that. The organization shall determine and apply criteria for the evaluation, selection, monitoring of performance, the evaluation of those external suppliers based on their ability to provide products or product and services in accordance with requirements. So basically monitoring supplier performance. And how do you go about doing that? How do you from initial evaluation and selection to ongoing performance evaluation and reevaluation? And you're supposed to keep a record of that, including any necessary actions that are arising from the evaluation of those external providers. So what about the type and extent of control? So an organization shall ensure that any of these externally provided processes, products, and services do not adversely affect the organization's ability to consistently deliver conforming products and services to its customers. The organization shall ensure that externally provided processes remain within the control of its QMS. The organization shall define both controls that it intends to apply to external providers and those it intends to apply to the resulting output, taking into consideration the potential impact of external provided processes, products, and services on the organization's ability to consistently meet customer and applicable state regulatory requirements, and the effectiveness of controls that are applied by external providers. So if the external provider has very little controls, you're going to have to take into consideration the increased controls that you might have to have internally to offset that gap. D, determine the verification and other activities necessary to ensure that externally provided products, processes, and services meet requirements. So information for external providers. So what do you need to give to them to make sure you're communicating properly? So it's really, we saw in 8.2 that communication process with a customer. Now we're talking about this kind of the same mechanism with external providers. The organization shall ensure that the adequacy of requirements prior to their communication to the external provider. So are you adequately conveying what it is that you need from them? The organization shall communicate to external providers its requirements for products, processes, and services to be provided, the approval of products and services, methods, processes, and equipment, the release of the product. So making sure that you're in alignment with your supplier on how that is going to work, competency, including any required qualification of persons, the external providers' interactions with your organization, control and monitoring of external providers' performance, and then verification validation activities that the organization and its customers intend to perform at the external provider's premises. So that covers, coming back over here, we've covered 8.1, 2, 3, and 4. So the next video will cover 8, 5, 6, and 7.